Set up your phone ice cream.
Okay, everybody, rise like a biscuit.
Boys.
No. That means we're all going silent. So we pay attention, get down a good house, have a seat. All right, for the tiny people at home, I just checked the notebooks, gave them a grade on that. I would like you to send me a copy of your last 3 pages of your notebook. Just send that to me via email. I want to see what kind of notes you're taking. I should not see that you just copied off or printed out my notes. If you hand wrote them, okay, but there should be more details in there turning my notes into your notes. That's really incredibly important. Also, I have been checking test grades. I got a note from one of the people at home that their parents saw it, but I haven't heard from some of the others. So make sure I get an email from mom and dad telling me that they've seen your test, seen that green piece of paper. All right, cool. Oh, one quick check here. We had. His. Sawyer is in deep doo-doo because we still haven't seen his. All right. And then Augustus, you showed me yours? All righty. No one put a quarter in you. All right. Let's see here. Where did we leave off? We talked about John Chavis yesterday.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Let's go up there. Yeah, that's where we left off.
All right, we're going to talk about the Carolinas here now. Originally, North and South Carolina were together. One plantation given to 8 lords as a proprietorship. So 8 people were running this, and they were going to profit from it. Yeah.
May I eat right now or
No.
no?
Okay. Proprietorship was 8 lords, and what they planned to do was to raise silk, wine, and olive oil. Unfortunately, the soil, the climate of the Carolinas doesn't work for that. So you can get silkworms and they'll die. You can try to grow olives and it won't work, and well, they didn't have good luck with wine. Actually, a nice little wine business in South Carolina now, but they couldn't do it in colonial times. What they did get was rice and indigo. Rice and indigo. Rice, we all know what that is. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is
Indigo.
Indigo Montoya.
Hi.
You're my father. Prepare to die. Okay. All right. Indigo. Indigo is a plant which does what?
Makes them purple.
It makes stuff purple. That's exactly right. It can be used as a dye for cloth, and purple was a royal color. So this is something that rich people would like. And it also can be used for printer's ink. So it has some practical purposes now that we have the printing press invented and we've got people wanting to get books and knowledge is being passed around because we're in the Renaissance. So these were a couple of good crops because rice, man, there's always people willing to eat. That's what they ended up with. The main town in any of the Carolinas was Charlestown. It's not pronounced Charlestown anymore. Give your finger up in front of the camera. What are you doing?
There's a huge fly.
Oh no, a fly! It will probably eat Cha-Cha! Oh no! Ah! Listen. Okay, it's a fly, Danny. All right, we're not gonna worry about it. He'll fly around, he'll make friends, lay eggs in somebody's ears, but don't worry about it.
I can smash you with my hands.
Okay. No, we're done with the flies. We're done with the flies. Pay attention over here. All right. Charlestown isn't pronounced that way anymore, so let's all learn how to properly say something in case you ever go down south. It is Charleston. Charleston. Yeah, they would never lower themselves to pronounce an R, so Charleston. Anyway, Charleston was very aristocratic. It is right here, down in the lower part of South Carolina on the coast. It is one of the great natural ports along North America. And because Charleston was such a wonderful port, it made it easy to bring ships in from Europe. Therefore, of course, that's where trade started. Where trade is happening, that's where people would build their plantations to grow the rice, to grow the indigo. So this is where civilization, the English civilization began in the Carolinas, was down in the lower part of what's now South Carolina. And interestingly enough, well, first of all, when I say Charleston is very aristocratic, it's a very interesting city because actually Charlestonians call it the Holy City because like there's no place on earth anywhere near as good as Charleston in the minds of the Charlestonians. There's only one other city in America that's like that, and that's New York. New Yorkers feel like if you don't come from New York, you're kind of worthless because everything great comes from New York. Well, Charlestonians feel that there's no other place on earth which is as close to heaven as Charleston. So anyway, they're really kind of fond of themselves. And we get this again, we're taking off our blinders. We have this opinion that, oh my gosh, those Southerners were so prejudiced. Geez, they were prejudiced. Well, if you talk about African Americans, you are dead on right. No doubt about it. They turned the people into slaves. But there were some other groups that was very interesting. There's a group called Huguenots. And it's in the notes for the kids at home. You can see it. Huguenots, capital Huguenots. Those are French Protestants. Remember, up in Maryland, the Catholics from England, they weren't welcome. So they went over to a colony over in the New World. Well, England was Protestant. France was Catholic. So it was just the opposite thing. It was the Protestants who weren't welcome in France. And so those people called Huguenots, some of them moved over and they were welcomed into South Carolina. Note, you'll have to ask later, you're asking me something about the notes. So is this a question explaining something or saying what was that definition again? Okay, wait until later, we'll get it. Okay, and then they welcomed the Scots. They're not Scotch. Okay? Scotch is that thing that Sawyer sneaks from his dad's liquor cabinet. That's Scotch. This is Scotch. Scotch. People from Scotland.
Yeah.
Where the men proudly wear dresses. Okay, they're killed.
I was killed.
What did you say? You should be killed?
I know.
I agree. No.
Yeah, I actually do have a kilt though.
You do have a kilt?
Yeah. Oh, I think that.
Are you're Scottish?
Where's yeah, I'm very much Scottish.
Okay. All right. So the Scots were welcome down there. That's a different kind of religion. And it's not up here, but in South Carolina, there was actually a reasonably sized Jewish community. Now that's big. I mean, think about it. This is non-Christian. They were welcome. They had a synagogue. And this is the day and age when the Christians are barely getting along among themselves. We had the Maryland Act of Toleration, and the Quakers were fairly welcoming up in Pennsylvania, but they're still killing each other, members of the same religion, over in Britain. And here you have the people of South Carolina who are supposed to be so prejudiced and discriminating. Well, they're welcoming Jewish people. This is really interesting and eye-opening because you think about it again. Stop accepting one instance and broadening it to everything. Again, you talk about African Americans and you say Southerners were prejudiced. There is no doubt. It's absolutely true. But when you look at other things, they were actually more open than a lot of other people. Yeah, buddy.
I know this. I told you what white people were.
Were white people ever slaves? Two other white people.
Okay.
And I don't know of any cases, particularly in Africa. Well, there's actually, yes, I do. I mean, even modern day, there is some slavery in Africa, and sometimes some of those people are white, but that's just a tiny little bit. I mean, we're talking about a person here, a person there, and that's usually based on religion, okay, more than on it.
What religion says, yes, I would want to be a slave?
I don't think anybody ever says, I'd love to be your slave.
Because like my mom forces me to be a slave.
This is true. Parents do have the right to have their children as slaves. No, not really. Okay, yeah, small man of green. Aristocratic means they feel noble, they feel superior. Aristocrats, that's another name for nobles. The people with the titles in England, the people like Count and Duke and Earl. In France, the Marquis. And so they feel like they're just inherently superior. And these people, particularly back then, the plantation owners, nowadays it's kind of the old families of Charleston, they feel they have a great superiority because they are from Charleston. All righty, cool. They had slavery because they tried to fill their need for workers in other ways. And we're going to do a whole day explaining how this came about a little bit later in the year. But what's important is they had this work to do, and they decided the best way for them to get the work done was to use black slaves. Remember, it was the Dutch that came and sold the Africans originally to the English colonists in Jamestown, but or in Virginia. But down in South Carolina, that's where slavery took off more intensely and in greater numbers than anywhere else, in any other colony. South Carolina was just a hotbed of slavery, lots of it. There were soon, like I said, more black people than white people in South Carolina. Not more black people than slave owners, because most people didn't own slaves. More black people than all white people in South Carolina, and they were slaves. Not important about the last part there. Okay, cool. Okay, now what happened with North Carolina? So we got South Carolina started down around Charleston, and up in North Carolina, it kind of grew differently. Everybody look up here at the map for a minute. You have down here, here's the port of Charleston. This is the natural port, obvious place to bring in trade. But up here, you don't have a big port along the side. What you have is a string of towns kind of across the northern center of the state. What that began was dissenters. Remember, members of a group who don't agree with everything that the group believes. Well, members of a group from Anglican Virginia. So up in Virginia, the regular old high Anglicans, the guys that like the smells and bells, the followers of the king, that's who's up there. And there were a couple more Christian sects. I'm going to move my mouse for a minute. Sects. S-E-C-T-S. Sects. That means a group within a group. A couple more Christian groups. The Methodists and the Baptists had started. And they weren't welcome up with the Anglicans, because Virginia was not one of those that had a lot of religious toleration. So these people left Virginia and just moved down into North Carolina. Musical interlude while you right now. Omar! Yep. Oh, what you want is an answer, huh? Okay. You can think about that. That's a good thing to think about. No, I won't tell you the answer to that question. All right, Dad, pirates. Pirates. Arr, pirates. Along the North Carolina coast. Lots of them. There's no big port city around here. There's no big English Navy presence. There's something down in Charleston. There's stuff up in Chesapeake Bay, but this is a little bit of a wide open stretch. So it was a good place for pirates to come and attack ships. The most famous of these was Blackbeard. Named because he had a black beard. Oh, you children are geniuses. It's incredible. He was crazy. He was nuts. Okay. Everybody look, see? I have a beard. My beard is made of hair. Have you ever seen hair on fire? It's not pleasant. It smells bad. And it really burns whatever it's attached to. Blackbeard, at one point, just to show you that he really was nuts, and I'm not talking about figuratively, I mean literally, the man was nuts. He tied burning rags into his beard to go into battle on a couple of occasions. Okay, I like my face. I don't want my face to burn up. So anybody who would light fires and have them dangling off their beard, they're crazy. And he was a vicious, horrible person, but he was never managed to be caught by the governor of North Carolina. It was actually some people from Virginia that finally caught Blackbeard. They thought maybe the governor of North Carolina was taking some bribes. That the pirates would attack ships and flip the governor a few bucks, little money, 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 money. Yeah. So they give him a few dinero, and he would look the other way and not catch the pirates. Just so you ladies know, you have a future in crime. Don't feel bad. There's a potential for you in piracy. There was a pirate. Oh, wait.
Oh, this story?
There was a lady named Anne Bonny. She's always mentioned. She was part of a pirate crew. But again, this is revisionist history stuff where people are trying to change history. She's mentioned like the great pirates of Captain Kidd and Blackbeard and Anne Bonny. She was a member of a crew. She wasn't a captain. She didn't have her own ship, but there were lady pirates. And so I know that at some point in time, Clara will be ready to go. Slap on a couple of cutlasses, get yourself a parrot on the shoulder, a couple of little cool pistols. She'll be ready to be out in Lake Michigan, like attacking little boats go out on tour. Okay, Anne Bonny, she wasn't a captain, but she was a pirate. So yay! You tell me.
Wait, no.
And I just see if there's any more. Doesn't look like there is. Oh, there is. Yes, sir. That means people say the great pirates. She's mentioned as one of them, but she was just a member of a group. Doesn't take away from the fact that yes, women can be horrible, nasty, appalling, illegal creatures too. Speaking of, yes, Claire.
Was Anne Bonny part of the crew with Blackbeard?
She was on several of the pirate ships, but I don't believe she was with Blackbeard. Hey! Let's go over and look at something else. We need some more colonies. Ooh, we need to talk about rice too. Okay, we're over on lesson 14, rice. Most of this, you guys are gonna know. We're gonna talk about a couple of specific things. Yes, ma'am.
Can I keep you posted notes for Thursday?
There's one more set of notes on that I don't leave. Okay, it's like, and one makes 13 or something. But look under USH, and this is 14 should be USH 50.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the heading?
Right. Okay. Yes, sir. What, honey? Revisionist history is when somebody looks at history and they don't like what they see, so they just want to change the story so it fits what we want in modern times. Okay? Okay. James II. Now let me go back and remember what happened. Charles I had his head cut off. And then there was Oliver Cromwell there for 11 years, being Lord Protector of England. Then Charles II came on the throne, but he turned Catholic on his deathbed, right near the end of his life. And then James II came on, and his wife was openly Catholic. And the Anglican lords thought, this guy's probably a Catholic. We bet he's a Catholic. And honestly, he probably was. So they said, we can't have a Catholic in charge of the Church of England. So they needed to get rid of him. They forced him to abdicate. go back and be an absolute ruler. Way back before, who was the king that gave up their rights? King John with the Magna Carta. He said, we should go back before that. Now, this is the end of the 1600s, and King John signed the Magna Carta in what year? 1215. So it's been 450, 60 years since some of the rights were given away. But he says, no, we need to go back and I should just be completely in charge. Because he believed in the divine right of kings. That's another one of those things you need to be aware of. It doesn't matter which side of any political argument that your parents are on, your family's on, the side you hear. What you have to understand is that the other side, whether you think it's logical, emotional arguments, no matter what it is, they believe what they're saying. They're not just saying, well, I don't really believe this, but I want to do something else. They believe it. Like those southern slave owners, they believed that black people were not quite human, so that's the way they could keep them enslaved. Like the Puritans believed, well, you know what? Everybody should inform on everybody else to make sure that we keep people forced to be Puritan. Well, here we have the Glorious Revolution, and they said, we got to get rid of James. Remember the Glorious Revolution? It was glorious because they removed the king, James II, without there being a war, with no battle. So the Glorious Revolution, James was kicked off his throne, and in came William and Mary. But now William and Mary, they had to negotiate to become king and queen, because they were already off being the Prince of Orange and his wife over there in the Netherlands. And the British said, well, we just had the Puritans, we just had a couple of kings, didn't work out too well. If we want to continue to have this king and queen, we need to make a deal. And when I told you about part of the negotiation, they had to agree to become members of the Church of England, because the king was going to be head of the Church of England. So they had to agree to that. And another thing they had to agree to was called the English Bill of Rights. The English Bill of Rights. This is adding on to Magna Carta. Magna Carta, we said, was 1215. And King John. And what the Magna Carta did was it gave rights that couldn't be taken away to the king. It gave rights to the nobles, only to the people with titles. Princess this, Duke this, Duchess that, Countess this, Count that. Those people with castles and lands and wealth and people working for them, they had rights. But the ordinary people, nothing. The peasants, they had nothing. Well, now, this is, I'm just going to put W and M for William and Mary. 1688, and William and Mary, they're going to give all of those rights to all English people. All those rights that were given to the nobles with Magna Carta, now they're going to go to all English people. And it limited the power of kings much more. Kings or queens. And they said, okay, these nobles have had all the political power, and they were in a group called the House of Lords. Like we have a Senate and a House of Representatives. They had a House of Lords, and now they're going to have a House of Commons, which is just groups of commoners, ordinary peasant people that have been elected to help make laws. And it started off where the House of Lords was like this, and the House of Commons was like this, and it shifted so far over now that in 1999 they got rid of the House of Lords. It's just the House of Commons now. That's Parliament. Because why should somebody have any political power just because of who their daddy is? We've moved past that. Cool.
Yeah.
Triangle trade. When does this end?
When it ends.
9?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. The triangle trade, or you can call it the triangular trade, or you can call it the Atlantic slave trade. It's all exactly the same thing.
Like, what is this called? Still right?
Called what?
What is the head of this? Still right?
No, switch over to triangle trade. Make it the slave trade. All right. You have a list here of different places across the Atlantic where different valuable commodities are produced. In Virginia, they made tobacco and sugar. In England, they had cash because they didn't make any American money. There was no American nation. It was all part of England. So if you wanted cash instead of just trading things, that came from England. Guns, those were made in England. Cloth, that was made in England. From Africa, there were slaves to be bought and sold. In Barbados, down in the Caribbean, there was sugar, and in Charleston, rice. What would happen in the Atlantic slave trade? It was called the triangular trade because each ship going on a voyage would make 3 stops, unload whatever their cargo was, and buy whatever was produced at the new place, always making a profit. But no matter where they went, always, one of the stops was Africa. Because by far the most profitable thing that they could bring across the Atlantic were slaves. That was the most profitable part of the trade. So that's what they always stopped there. Everybody look up here. So they might go from Barbados, pick up a load of sugar, drop it off in Charleston, they sell the sugar, buy rice, head over, sell the rice, buy slaves, come back over and start a new triangle. Okay, go to Virginia and pick up tobacco. And then go over to England, pick up guns, and then they stop and pick up slaves. Come back over to the New World. This was huge. It's called the triangular trade because always it was 3 stops. You may call it the triangular trade, the triangle trade, the triangular trade, or the Atlantic slave trade are all exactly the same thing. All of them are, each of them is perfectly acceptable in your writing. Now understand how ships work. I have a ship. I'm over here. I fill it full of hand sanitizer. So I got a ship full of hand sanitizer, and I sail over to the distant port of Reedsville. Pardon me. Ryderville, where I traded for bags of colored markers. Now you have a ship full of hand sanitizer, and we have bags full of colored markers. I can't leave empty, okay? I always have to buy what the local product is. Then I sail on over to Annaliseville, where they sell colored markers because she only has like 1,000 of them here. And I buy Snip Snap water bottles. What? Office water bottles. Okay. And that's the way it has to be. It's hard to sail a ship that's empty. They don't sit well in the water, and you'd be losing money. If somebody were to take one portion of the trip empty, that's a cost that won't be made up. They'd be losing money. So always something full. And it's not replaced. Virginia's black coats. All right, this is going to be weird. There were several ways that someone could go to work, and we'll talk more about these in the very near future. One of the ways was they could be an apprentice. So you have Gus there, and Gus, they say, his dad says, yeah, I'm a farmer, and I already have 3 older sons, and I can't divide the farm anymore when I die. So my youngest son, Gus, I got to do something with it. So he might say to Gus, Gus, what do you want to do? And Gus says, well, I think it's really cool to be a silversmith. So he might go over and apprentice Gus to a silversmith, and that's the trade Gus would learn. Or it could be that somebody already knows how to be a silversmith. Okay, Omar already knows how to be a silversmith, and it happens to be that at Bilal's silversmith shop, he needs a new worker. So he might sign what's called an indenture, where he agrees to pay the voyage of Omar over to the New World to work in his shop, and then Omar has to work for free for like 5, 6, 7 years to pay off the cost of the voyage. That's an indentured servant, and then of course there were slaves. Well, when the Dutch first brought the Africans over, now picture this. They were somewhere over in Africa, on their home continent. Somewhere along the way, they probably got bumped on the head, tied up. They definitely were sold. They were stuck in a ship where they were in chains. They were transported halfway around the world where they didn't want to go. And originally, they were sold as indentured servants, which means you have to work for a few years, and then you'll be free, but you have to pay us back for the cost of the voyage to America. Okay, picture that. You're ready to get on the bus tomorrow morning. Somebody knocks you on the head and kidnaps you, and then takes you over and says, well, I set you free, but, that was a long drive to get to our hideout, and you owe me for that. You have to pay me for the cost of the trip. It doesn't make any sense, but that's the way they were originally sold. In Virginia, they said, whoa, this works out really well with these black guys doing our work for us. And believe me, the white guys were working right next to them. But we're using the extra help and it's working well. Why don't we make this arrangement permanent? Those laws were called the Virginia Black Code. And the Virginia Black Codes were laws that turned the Africans into property, made them slaves, made it permanent. Yes, boss.
Why Africa? Why not like Asia or Australia?
Again, we'll talk a little bit more later, but the basic idea is 2 things: color and power. If I take Sawyer,
Yes.
make him my slave,
No.
and he runs off, how's anybody going to recognize Sawyer? But if I take an African, put him in the middle of a society of all black people, and I hate colors, red people, Indians, if they're bright red Indian, I never. Anyway, if they're red people, is he obvious to see? Yes. So if he's walking around, we can ask him, what are you doing? Who do you belong to? What's going on here? He's easy to catch. And the other thing is, if they went over to France, the British went over to France and grabbed some French people, they'd have to deal with the very powerful French army and the very powerful French navy. If they go out to Africa where they're all in tiny little tribes separated and they grab some black people, what's the tribe going to do? Get in a couple of canoes and try to go to England and beat the English Navy or Army? They can't. It's a power situation. So color and power. Also religious. They're not Christians, so hey, we're going to give them eternal life. We're going to make them Christians. Yes, ma'am. Man, not man. Really, you're going to still ask me if I can give you the answer to a question?
Yeah.
No. All right. Here I come. I'm going to spray them out. Hurry, quick, fast.
Oh my God.
Wait a minute. What's this thing doing here? You're finished. Why is this here?
I'm finished.